Hello, this is a re-recording of the presentation I gave for the conference on Illinois history that happened in October of 2020. The presentation is on the Old Joliet Prison in Joliet, Illinois, and it's titled, "It's Never Too Late to Mend Behind the Walls of the Old Joliet Prison." This will be a brief overview of the history of the prison and what is being done with it today. So as you can see on the screen, this scene is at the end of the movie The Blues Brothers. It is the concert that happened, and you can see the saying on the back wall, "It's never too late to mend." That saying was put there by the wardens to give inmates something to think about to try and change their ways later on. Now, so we're actually going to start down in Alton. So the Alton prison was the first state penitentiary built in 1833. Alton is down near St. Louis. By the 1850s, it had become very overcrowded, and even possibly by the mid to late 1840s, it had been. This overcrowding led to the decision of a new facility to be built by the state of Illinois, and that was decided on to happen in Joliet. Now, the prison had actually closed by 1860, with its final transfer of prisoners happening to be sent to Joliet. The picture you see was actually taken in 1861, and you can see the lines being pointing to the prison that was still existing in Alton from this angle. Now you can see, I'll be moving this around since it interferes with it a little bit. So you can see another picture from the other side. You can see the cell blocks. And then this picture right here is all that's left today of the Alton prison. Now, December 31st, 1861, Major General Henry Halleck ordered an inspection of the prison in Alton for a possible use as a military prison for Confederate prisoners of war. That following February 9th, your first Confederate prisoners arrived. Over 11,000 prisoners passed through these walls in over 3 years, and over 1,500 prisoners were listed as having died on a cemetery monument in North Alton. July 7th, 1865 is when your last prisoners had died or were released. That was just a few months after the Civil War ended. The prison was torn down not too long afterwards, and the stone from the prison was actually used in various buildings in Alton. Now, this bit of stone wall right here, like I said, is all that exists of the prison today. How it still exists is that while they were, from what I've read, while they were tearing down the prison, this got buried underneath a pile of debris. So that's how they missed it. And so this is all that's left. Now, Joel Matson, he was born in Watertown, New York in 1808. And he was a school teacher and also built railroads in the South before the Civil War. He moved to Joliet in 1836 as a contractor on the Illinois-Michigan Canal, and later opened a woolen mill. So it was very successful in town. From 1842 to 1853, he served in the Illinois State Senate. And from 1853 to 1857, he served one term as governor. During his time as governor, he did reduce state debt by $7 million. He enacted the funding of public education with property taxes, and he brought in the maximum security prison to be built in Joliet, which is where he was living when he was elected. So his term in office was marred by a scandal, which was canal script that was used to build the Illinois-Michigan Canal. And that scandal was redeeming canal script that had already been redeemed. So kind of double dipping, or even more, probably even might have even been more. For this, the Illinois legislature actually did find him guilty. He owed the state $253,000, and this was paid off by selling off his mansion and properties at auction. He died in 1873 in Chicago, where he was living with his daughter, and he's buried in Oakwood Cemetery in Joliet. That is Joel Matson on the left, and that is his monument in Joliet on the right. Nelson Elwood. He was also born in New York. He was born in Otsego County in 1818. He came out here. He was working as a clerk in, before he came out here, he was working as a clerk in Lockport, New York when he was 15. And 4 years later, he had moved to Lockport, Illinois to work on the Illinois-Michigan Canal. He was an engineer during the summer, and then during the winter months when the canal was frozen over, he was a school teacher. In 1843, he was elected to the Will County clerk's position, and he moved to the county seat of Joliet. 4 years later, he was admitted to the bar, and he went on to form a law partnership and became secretary for the Chicago and Rock Island Railroad. Now, in 1854, he partnered with future Governor Joel Matson, who we just talked about, and they built the Chicago and Alton Railroad, and its first stop south of Joliet was named in honor of him. In 1857, he was appointed as commissioner to the State Penitentiary Board, and that board decided on a new prison location, which was Joliet. And he actually died in 1861 and is also buried at Oakwood Cemetery. That is Nelson Elwood on the left, and that is his gravestone on the right. William Warren Boynton, or W.W. Boynton, he was born in Massachusetts, not New York, Massachusetts, in 1818. He was trained as a carpenter first, and then went to New York City and became an architect. He came out to Chicago in 1853. By 1870, he had built quite a few things, and he was elected president to the Chicago chapter of the American Institute of Architects. 1874, he moved to and became mayor of Highland Park, which is a northern suburb of Chicago. And he is buried at Rose Hill Cemetery after he died in 1898. Now, some of his most memorable places that he designed was the Old Joliet Prison, the old water tower in Chicago up on Michigan Avenue, the entry gates to Rose Hill Cemetery, the Columbus Memorial Building, the old Chicago Board of Trade, and he was one of the 3 architects that were there for the state capitol building in Springfield. Now on the right is Boynton. On the upper left is the entry gates of Rose Hill Cemetery. And that on the lower right, on the lower left is his gravestone, which with all his accomplishments, I would think that it would be larger, but that it's a very simple stone. Now, these are some postcards from the prison, 1905, it's that early 20th century color scheme. It's very pretty. So these were from about 1905. Now, the history of the prison. So 1858, you had 53 inmates were transferred from Alton to begin building the prison. It was 50 men and 3 women. Boynton had come out the year before to sketch and start designing the prison. So among the 53 inmates that were brought up, your youngest inmate was in that group. He was 10 years old, and he was in for burglary. Not sure about his name. In 1865, the East Cell House was completed. The cells measured in at 4 feet wide by 7 feet long by 7 feet high. Imagine 2 prisoners being in that one cell. And then by 1877 become overcrowded, and you had sometimes 3 men in a cell. 1865, there are quite a few escapes and attempted escapes in the history of the prison. This is one of those times. So 3 prisoners, they paid off a guard, and they stayed behind, and 1 stayed behind, and 2 went over the wall. One of those inmates was shot by another guard who had come, because the other guard because he was paid off, he didn't do anything. So the other guard actually fired at and killed one of the inmates. A few weeks later, the other inmate was recaptured, and he ratted out the guard, and so probably that guard ended up behind bars. I'm not sure where. 1869, another attempted escape. So there was a prisoner working in the prison morgue, and he actually took one of the bodies out of a coffin and placed himself inside. Now, what you don't consider is coffins are not meant for the living. So there was really no air supply coming in to that coffin. So when they were getting close to the cemetery, he actually had to lift the lid a little bit of the coffin, get some fresh air, and that's how he was caught. I'm sure the guys who were carrying him out probably had a heart attack. They did that. So by 1884, you had a little over 1,100 of the 1,400 convicts were working for contractors, private contractors. That was really what was done in the prison system during the day, is using convict labor. Your average price was approximately per man 50 cents, about 40 to 50 cents per man per day, according to the Chicago Tribune. From 1893 to 1894, there was actually no power source for the shops and factories on site. So there was actually a modern electric plant that was built with convict labor. In 1898, there was a new generator purchased, and the powerhouse was actually built. So on your left-hand side is actually an original cell in the prison. Now, from 1948 to about 1951, there was a modernization of the prison that happened. So you can see, and then you can see how small this was. When they were modernizing, the warden at the time actually moved this cell to its present location for future inmates to be shown, to be told, look how good you have it now. So watch out what you're doing now. So on the right-hand side, you can see inmates inside an original cell. Now, in each cell, there was that steel bunk, plus each inmate had a stool to sit on, and you had a water jar and a waste bucket. There was no indoor plumbing that happened during this time. So imagine a water jar and a waste bucket. And if you, in the middle of the night, were thirsty, hopefully you grabbed the correct one, because if you didn't, you probably would not be going back to sleep. Something to think about. All right. This is the powerhouse as it was being built in 1898. The generators were coal-fired, and then in 1996, they got upgraded. So it was almost 100 years before they were upgraded. In 1895, you had a new hospital that was built because the original hospital was actually built pretty much right next to the kitchen. So that really gave the chance of healthy inmates being exposed to all the diseases of the unhealthy inmates. The new hospital had pretty much modern appliances, and it also increased the space and air and light and ventilation. July 1896, the prison guard had, up until 1896, the prison guard was stripes. And this was actually abolished by Warden Robert Allen. However, even though that that striped prison guard was no longer used for the general population, for new prisoners and prisoners who needed extra supervision, they were placed in those, but that was also abolished in 1930. In 1860, an observer actually, according to the Chicago Tribune, described inmates as human zebras. Now, in 1896, you had up until 1896, the women's prison actually occupied the top 2 floors of the administration building. However, in 1896, you had a new women's prison that was built across the street. The women stayed there until 1933, when a new facility was built down in Dwight, Illinois, and that facility closed down in 2013. Now, in 1915, Odette Allen, who was the wife of Warden Edmund Allen, was murdered at the prison. Now, the warden and his family would have lived on site, and they had inmates known as trustees. Those were trusted inmates who helped out the family, drove them into town, did grocery shopping, things like that. One of those trustees at this time, his name was Joe Campbell. He had the nickname of Chicken Joe. Now, Joe had been with the Allens, and the warden in 1915 was the Allens were going over to Indiana for a conference on prisons to plan out a new facility, which eventually became Stateville Prison in Crest Hill, not too far away from this prison. The warden went ahead. Mrs. Allen stayed behind. She was having dresses made for fancy dinners. The next morning, you saw smoke coming out of Odette's bedroom, and they knocked down the door, and they found she had been bludgeoned to death with a water pitcher, was laying on the bed, and had been burned as the bed burned. Joe was immediately arrested and sentenced to hang. There were multiple appeals, with multiple people actually writing to the governor to get him exonerated, which included Warden Allen. He knew Joe, didn't believe he did it. So the governor eventually, he commutes Joe's sentence to life in prison, and Joe died there in 1951. In 1917, there was one of quite a few riots that happened. There were 7 buildings that were burned. The National Guard was called in, and the old school discipline, which had been kind of pushed aside for reform by men such as Warden Allen, was reinstalled. In 1928, the electric chair was brought in. So for North segregation, the second floor of that building became death row for about the next 20 years. When the electric chair was brought in February, your first executions were that following December of 3 men who had originally committed to larceny, but later on it escalated to more, and which became murder, and so the 3 of them were executed. Now, this is the old prison garb. You can see the stripes. You can see how they were observed to be human zebras. And on the right-hand side are the old school prison guards with their canes, which had heavy-ended handles, which they could use to discipline inmates. Now, this is the women's prison that was built in 1896, right on the other side of the prison. That is Warden Allen on the left, and that is his wife, Odette, on the right. This is North segregation. So you can see over here, this is what it originally looked like, and also what it looks like today in the middle. And on the right-hand side is the electric chair that was used. It goes back to where we saw in the beginning at the Blues Brothers concert. It's never too late to mend. And that was put on the bottom of North segregation. So it would have actually been down here off camera. And but this is what it looks like on the floor. Now in 1931, you had, nope, went too far, sorry. In 1931, you had another attempted escape. 5 inmates attempted escape, resulting in 3 dead and 2 surrendered. This set off powder keg that caused 4 buildings to be destroyed and an investigation of the parole board. So you had 100 Illinois State Police troopers and 4 companies of National Guard, which were brought in. No, hang on. So from 1858 to 1948, you had a prison population of, there were about 900 cells that went up from approximately 300 inmates to an overcrowded high of 1,900 approximately in 1877. Now, from approximately 1947 to 1953, there was a converting of the cell blocks, and this expanded the cell size from that 7 by 7 by 4 to 10 feet long by 5 feet wide by 8 feet high. And it also installed running water within the cell houses, which had not existed up until now. Remember the waste bucket. After World War II, there was a series of tunnels that were installed underneath through the limestone, and this allowed for quick mobilization and execution by the guards to go in various places throughout the prison, especially during riots. They could, mobilize at the armory and pop up in quite a number of places to quell riots. In 1996, you had the upgrade to the powerhouse, including the new generator. And in 2002, the Joliet Penitentiary closed. Inmates were transferred to Stateville and other institutions throughout Illinois. Now, in the 1800s, there was the prison trade system. So, I'm sorry, that was after. So after the convict labor system was the prison trade system. So there are, so these are quotes from different newspapers. So from the Wilmington Independent in 1865, there are at present in confinement at the State Penitentiary Joliet 635 convicts, of whom 590 are men and 45 women, who are employed in the following manner: stone cutting, 100 inmates, 100 inmates in coopering, 75 in wagon making, 60 in cigar making, and other employments there were 60. There are 5 patients in the hospital. The Wilmington Advocate, 1872, just 7 years later, the occupation of the prisoners in the penitentiary at Joliet are thus stated: 164 make barrels, 36 make harness, 25 work in the foundry, 66 in a door butt shop, 50 work in the machine department, and 218 work on the enlargement of the prison building. And in 1879, a shoe shop convict. This is also pretty much let's see, there was actually an escape or an attempted escape. So a shoe shop convict at the penitentiary made an ingenious attempt at escape last Tuesday. He had by stealth fitted a false bottom to a large shoebox, and into this he crawled, carrying with him provisions for several days. His purpose was to lie concealed until the search for him was suspended, and then to make his escape over the wall at night. Two accomplices weakened and disclosed the hiding place after a long search had been made, and the would-be liberated was dragged from his place of concealment and placed in solitary. That was an inmate using his place for trade to try and escape. So this is the granite shop that was worked in by the inmates. And you can see a guard with his cane. Here's the quarry that was worked in. And these are other trades that were worked in. So you have the shoe store, you have a furniture store, and you had another one where they, in here around Christmas time, they actually made toys for children to be sent out. Now, onto political crookedness, which this is Illinois, so why not? So this is William Dougal. So he was born in Scotland in 1842. In 1858, when he was 16, he joined his father in northwestern Indiana. They cleared land for townships to build on. In the Civil War, he enlisted in the 15th Indiana Volunteer Regiment. He made his way from a private to a sergeant, and later he was promoted to captain of the 13th USCT, U.S. Colored Troops. He attended Chicago Medical College, which is now UIC, and he was the chief surgeon for the Illinois-Michigan Canal. He was a doctor for the prison, and later on he opened up his own practice out of his home in Joliet. Now, this is a letter that I've actually found at the Will County Historical Museum. This is, I call it the soap letter. So it's an 8-page letter that Dougal wrote in 1877. Reading through the letter, it appears to be another term for money. So he describes the prisoners being rented out as cheap labor for sometimes half the price of a regular workman per day. So 35 to 40 cents versus 80 cents for a regular workman. This cheap labor built foundations of a lot of industries of the prisons, from shoes to furniture to foundries. In March of 1877, Henry Cullum, who was the brother of the governor, was given a contract that was shortly after the governor's inauguration. In 1903, the prison labor contract system ended, and they transitioned to prison industries system instead, and that allowed the prisoners to actually have more of the money that they actually made instead of the prison having it. So in 1905, 40% of the prison-made goods could be sold, and the inmates could have that money. Now, in 1907, the Warden Murphy actually interpreted this to be that 40% of convict labor be used on the open market, and unions described it as a legalized burglary. Now, in 1914, inmates were allowed to keep their own wages from their prison jobs, and those prison-made items could also be sold within the prison to other inmates, and even to other inmates in other facilities across the state. So from the Joliet Signal, 1866, is there no remedy? We learned that additional prisoners from the penitentiary have been set to work in the stone quarries near the city. The prisoners so employed now number between 300 and 400. This working of prisoners 2 or 3 miles from the penitentiary to the injury of honest free labor was never contemplated by our legislature. It is an outrage upon honest, law-abiding citizens, not only of this facility, but throughout the state, and should be desisted. Let the evil be looked into and a remedy applied at the earliest possible period. Then in 1904, from the Wilmington Advocate, brickmaking, knit goods, and hosiery will be the industries at the Joliet Prison when the contract system is abolished within the next few months. This was formally decided upon Saturday last at a meeting of the State Board of Prison Contracts held at Springfield. Making of furniture was allotted the Chester Penitentiary, and printing and bookbinding will be the trades at the Pontiac Reformatory. Now, some infamous inmates that were at the prison. So Adolf Lutgert, who's known as the Chicago Sausage Killer, he murdered his wife. Leopold and Loeb in 1924, known as the crime of the century, they murdered 14-year-old Bobby Franks. That's a very interesting trial. Look it up for more information. Babyface Nelson, before he joined the Dillinger Gang. In 1932, he was being transported from Wheaton to the Joliet Penitentiary for a trial on bank robbery, and he escaped en route. Richard Speck, he was convicted of murdering 8 student nurses. James Earl Ray, who actually was the assassin of Martin Luther King Jr., he was actually convicted of robbing a cab driver of $11. I believe it was down in Alton. And he served a couple of years. And then John Wayne Gacy, he only served 21 hours. He was convicted of murdering 33 men and boys. Now, there are a lot of different media representations in the prison that were recorded, or whether in the prison or on the outside of the prison, it was in the background. So the first ever that was done was actually a documentary in 1914. And then you have the Blues Brothers, Weeds with Nick Nolte, Natural Born Killers, Stir of Echoes, Derailed, Let's Go to Prison, Early, and those are movies. TV shows that it would have been featured in. Early edition, the first season of Prison Break was all filmed at the Joliet Prison. Empire, and an episode of Ghost Adventures in 2019 was also filmed there. So these are just a few things. So you've got the Blues Brothers up here on the left. Now, when they filmed here in 1979, this is the gate. This is the infamous Blues Brothers gate that goes out onto Collins Street right here. The women's prison is right back to your left. When they filmed here, this gate actually did not work. So the studio actually spent about $36,000 on parts to get it to work for that one shot. That translates into today a little over $123,000. Your lower left, that is shot from Prison Break. So you can see here's the honor dorm. Here's the powerhouse. This is North segregation. The original cell would actually be right through here, this little doorway. Then you have the captain's quarters. You have commissary. No, I'm sorry. The captain's quarters are here. This is the commissary, and this is the bathhouse, the cafeteria, and this is the front, the west cell block. And then this is actually a movie poster from that first documentary in 1914. Now, after the prison, so the prison itself closed in 2002, and after that happened, and then the season of Prison Break was filmed, the state had a choice to make. So in 2005, and really the state really didn't do anything. They just let it sit there. So in 2005, there was the Collins Street Task Force was created to try and identify a long-term plan for reusing the prison, the women's prison, and the 130 acres around the U.S. Steel plant. Members of that task force were Senator A.J. Wilhelmy and Representative Jack McGuire. It was going along until the recession hit from 2008 to 2009. The there was a lot of loss of revenue because of the halting of it, and the recession. So from 2011 to 2012, there was actually grants that were afforded from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning and Urban Land Institute to identify reusing prison through a stabilization plan and urban development. They were very cost prohibitive because of the recession still being in effect. Now in 2013, this was actually the first of quite a few times when arson happened inside the prison. Because the prison was abandoned, and with the advent of the internet and people finding ways and places, there was a movement called Urban X that sprung up. It was urban exploration of abandoned places. Somebody who participated in this, at 3:15 in the morning, there were flames that came up, were seen coming up near the East Sallyport near Collins Street. The Joliet Fire Department, they were unable to get inside. They tried fighting the flames from the outside, but they were not able to get there. So the auto repair building was lost, and it was later investigation showed it to be intentional. Again, going to urban exploration. So in 2016, another fire happened at the intake and commissary structures. In January 2017, two young women actually broke in, and one of them got herself locked inside one of the cells. She was not able to get out. Her friend had to go out and call 911, and the fire department came in. They had to knock out a limestone wall in one of the cell blocks. Memorial Day 2017, another fire happened that destroyed the mattress factory, and then August 2018, a fire destroyed records warehouse. Now this is the fire that happened Memorial Day 2017. Because of all the destruction, the mayor of Joliet at the time, Mayor Odekirk, he was not happy, and mainly due to the fact that Joliet police and fire departments were risking their lives for state property. So he and other city officials met with Governor Rauner's team, and they constructed a 5-year lease with the state of between the state of Illinois and the city of Joliet. This agreement allowed direct city control of property and agreed for the city council to execute any agreements and for allowed monetization and development of prison property since its closure. The Joliet Area Historical Museum, they introduced a tour plan of stabilized ruin, which has been utilized by other sites such as Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. This allowed for a restricted, primarily outdoor tour that would rely on minimal building rehabilitation. There was an overwhelming demand that came from the public. Even before any of this happened, for many, many years, people would come to the museum and ask what was going on with the prison. There was a year of presenting plans to civic, labor, and residential groups. And after that, the Old Joliet Prison Preservation Coalition evolved into a public-private partnership of community groups and brought in hundreds of volunteers to begin repairs in preparation for the Joliet Area Historical Museum to conduct tours inside. August 2018, the year of that last set of arson, we kicked off the tours with the Great Prison Break-In, which this celebrated the prison's revitalization and bouts of vandalism with more than 3,000 people who came to enjoy concerts and tour through what buildings were open at the time. Today, the city of Joliet, Joliet Area Historical Museum, the Old Joliet Preservation Coalition, and community partners are promoting the prison around the world and for its long-term future viability, which a lot of people have asked, and that really is mainly for tourism. So this is an overview of the prison from Google Maps. So you have the administration building here along with the east cell block that would have been for temporary prisoners, and the west cell block for your permanent prisoners. And Joliet Jake would have been in here. You have the school building right here. Actually, it's the school on this end and the chapel on this end where this green roof is. This building, the laundry was on the bottom, and the top floor was the library. You have the honor dorm, which were your inmates who didn't cause any trouble or anything like that. That's where they were put. You have north segregation here, captain's quarters, your commissary, your bathhouse, cafeteria, and your hospital here. This is the quarry, the old quarry right over here. And that was where they would have gotten the stone to build the walls and buildings. You can see it is underwater now. So for the prison, starting in the spring, usually about March, tours are provided really through the end of October, 7 days a week now. There are various types of tours. You have self-guided, which you go through on your own. There are wayside interpretive signs for each of the buildings. You're on your own walking, and you do not go inside any of the buildings on the self-guided tours. Guided tours is an hour and a half, and you actually have a guide to tell you more of the history of the prison. You have photography tours, guard tours. We have a couple of former prison guards who give you a tour based on their experiences. We have our haunted history tour, which doesn't have anything to do with hauntings, but it has to do with the darker side of the prison. So beatings, torture, executions, murders, things like that. But we do have paranormal tours as well. So, starting in the spring, there are actually already dates that are available. So look at, go to jolietmuseum.org, look under prison, and it'll take you to where you can reserve your tours. With that, I believe that's it. I want to thank the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum employees and volunteers who allowed me to put this presentation together first. Also for those of my coworkers and everybody at the Joliet Area Historical Museum, and all of us volunteers at the Will County Historical Museum and Research Center. So, thank you for watching. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope that you come to the prison next year in 2021 and take tours and other historical ventures in the area. So thank you. Have a good day.